Hey all, here at OS Reviews, you're watching our video review of the HTC Desire 612. This is by no means a new device. In fact, it came out several years ago, so it's not going to replace a flagship or any expensive phone anytime soon. But the only reason why we're taking a look at this phone now is because the price is so cheap on Amazon and through third-party sellers. You can find this for around $30 without a contract, and that is an extremely good price to pay if you're looking for a backup phone, if you're looking for a dedicated media player, a phone to give to a child, or to the elderly. So starting with the design, the phone definitely looks very distinctive, especially with these red and black accents running across it. It looks much more expensive than the current $30 price tag. The Desire line by HTC has always been more of their value-oriented line, and they always have a very colorful, playful look, and this is no exception. On the back, we have an 8-megapixel autofocus-enabled camera with an LED flash. On the side here, we have access to rubber flaps, which covered up a micro SD card slot for expanding the 8 gigs of built-in memory. There's also a SIM card slot. It supports 4G LTE bands in the US, which is of course one of the benefits of having a HTC device. There's also a 3.5mm headphone jack on the top, along with a dedicated power switch. And on the other side, we have other rubber-covered keys for the volume rocker. And on the bottom, there is the micro USB port for charging. You can see it wraps around the entire band of the phone and makes gripping it a lot more easy, as well as having a very distinctive, playful look. On the front, one of the best attributes of the Desire 610 and the 612 is that HTC retained their BoomSound technology. That wasn't the case on the HTC Desire 500 that we reviewed several years ago. The screen at 4.7 inches is definitely on the smaller side by 2018 standards, and I guess the biggest downside to this phone and most of HTC's Desire phones from the past is the large bezels. Because of the BoomSound speakers that they had to employ on the top and on the bottom. Now, we do have an IPS panel on here, which is probably one of its biggest highlights compared to the aforementioned HTC Desire 500, which was also very popular as a prepaid phone a few years back. That phone had a traditional TFT LCD display, which meant that viewing angles were horrible. On here, it's a lot improved, and you can see that even tilting it on the edges, the screen still remains fairly visible, as well as sensitive and easy to interact with. One of the benefits of having a lower res panel is that the processor doesn't have to do as much work, which, speaking of, it has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 400 chipset, which is a very tried and tested processor we've seen countless times. It's a quad-core chipset clocked at 1.2 gigahertz, and surprisingly, it's still kept up pretty well. Just like the Snapdragon 800, it's aged quite well and was well ahead of its time when it was first released. And you can see that general navigation still remains fluid and smooth on this phone even after its release a few years ago. Although 1 gig of RAM might be unusable on certain ROMs designed by LG or Samsung because they're cluttered with lots of bloatware, especially in past versions, it's absolutely not the case on HTC Sense. So as a quick refresher on HTC Sense, in terms of the lock screen here, we have a few assortment of apps which we can commonly use and favorite them. So for instance, if I want to access a phone dialer, I could just flick that up and have access to that particular app right away. Today, something like Blink Feed is very common even on stock Android, but back when this phone was released, it was ahead of its time. And again, it's still a very useful feature that I enjoy, clicking on an article, for instance, and giving us a very nice reader-like view that quickly renders and gives us the news for quick reading on the go. The drag down notification shade also works as expected. We can drag it once to look at notifications and use 2 fingers to have a quick look at all of the programs as well as settings that we can change, and we have software keys on the bottom of the display as opposed to being built into the phone's chin directly like on the original HTC One M7 here. It does come with a lot of apps pre-installed, which might not be the best thing considering the phone only has 8 gigs of built-in memory. It leaves just a few gigs remaining for you to install your own programs from the Play Store, but luckily you can expand on the memory pretty easily. But we do have access to some Verizon specific apps that are considered as bloatware, and you can uninstall if you don't want to use them, in addition to the typical Google apps like Gmail, Maps, YouTube, Drive are all pre-installed on here as well. There's also a widget from Amazon as kind of an ad for their ebooks and services, which might not be useful for everyone, that you can also uninstall. In addition, there are quite a few other cloud services, in addition to Amazon services, audiobook services that have been thrown in there by the carrier. Taking a quick look at the camera experience at 8 megapixels, again, it's not shabby, especially since it is an autofocus sensor. At may sound a little puzzling, but the Desire 500 and previous HTC Desire phones sometimes gave us fixed focus lens, which were not very good, especially if you were capturing objects up close to the sensor, and as a result images would be soft, muted, and lacking a lot of detail. But on here it's fast to focus, it's really quick to capture an image, and the app experience again is very quick. Obviously, it can compete with more expensive flagship level cameras that we have today, but really it's not bad, especially when you have a good amount of lighting. Colors look very accurate and natural, and even when the light is fading, as you can see here, when it's completely dark, it still captures the shot without too many problems rather quickly. And with the LED flash illuminated, you can see it casts a very natural looking color onto the walls. There's also something called Scribble, which is basically HTC's notepad app, but you can see how colorful and reimagined it is compared to just something really stock or vanilla. You have a lot more options to play around with. So from that quick audio clip, you can tell that the speaker quality really is outstanding on this phone. Not quite as deep in terms of bass as the HTC One, M7, and M8 that came after it, but nonetheless it still is one of the better audio experiences that you'll find from any smartphone, let alone one that is so cheap. Overall, I was just impressed with how responsive the experience felt and how smooth all the gestures as well as navigation controls all felt. It just feels very seamless and fast, fluid, something that doesn't match the really low price that you can find this now at. So I was quite impressed with that regard, even with more than a handful of apps currently open in the background. So going over to the Chrome browser next, you have to wait for a split second longer than you would on, again, the latest and newest phones on the market, but as a whole it still loads very quickly over Wi-Fi for a super complex page like this, and you can see that scrolling is quick as well. There's no checkerboarding that appears when you flick very quickly, and even when we zoom in, the text will also reload and re-render. Again, one of the benefits of having a slightly lower res display is that there's less pixels to push around by the processor, so the experience still feels very fast and smooth on what seems like low-end specs today. Under phone settings, we can see that incredibly the 612 also comes with NFC on board. This is a feature that even many modern mid-end phones do not have, or even some flagships. So it's excellent that it's built onto this. It allows us to very quickly share content. It even allows for mobile payment services like Google Wallet to be installed and enjoyed. The only downside, if you are really getting a device just for gaming, would probably be the 1 gig of RAM. You definitely have to wait a little longer for everything to fully load. Furthermore, I would recommend closing out of other programs before launching into the game or title, especially if you plan on running something very graphically intensive. But most of the apps will still load and they will still be installed without any issues. So that's been our throwback / late review of the HTC Desire 612. For the price, you're getting an extremely striking design as well as surprisingly good performance in actual day-to-day use, which kind of juxtaposes the really low specs that we would consider on paper today. Its highlights would include the good IPS panel combined with excellent BoomSound speakers as well as a distinctive look and a pretty decent camera as well. Its downsides would be the bezel size, which is considerably large by 2018 standards, and having only 1 gig of RAM. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for just a $30 phone, which makes excellent communications, phone calls, and for web browsing, then this is actually a pretty solid choice to consider once again. Thanks for watching this video here at OS Reviews.